Whether you're talking about Roman emperors, European kings, or American presidents, even the most legendary rulers were capable of friendship. That said, being friends with a powerful person isn't always so easy, and many of those friendships simply didn't last, or even ended in tragedy. So, today we're going to take a look at some famous historical friendships that went wrong. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other famous friendships you would like to hear about. Okay, chums, let's do this. The story of CLEITUS and Alexander the Great occurred so long ago that little is certain about the nature of it. CLEITUS, which is spelled a little like Cletus, so we can assume he wore a trucker's hat, was the commander of the royal squadron of Alexander's elite companions, the cavalry unit made up of Macedonian nobility. Most likely, he was older than Alexander and served under Alexander's father, Philip II, then continued serving when Alexander became king in 336 BCE. Alexander reportedly slew CLEITUS with a spear at a banquet in Maracanda in 328. This is generally not considered proper banquet behavior. The four surviving sources differ on the details of the banquet, but most of them agree on the general facts. CLEITUS represented the old guard that supported Philip. By this point in Alexander's campaigns, he had declared himself divine and had begun to adopt Persian customs in his ruling style. Most likely, Alexander took CLEITUS out to eliminate a difficult opponent. You'd think eliminating an enemy over dinner would please Alexander, but according to Plutarch, no sooner had CLEITUS fallen with a roar and a groan than the king's anger departed from him. In fact, Alexander was allegedly so distraught that he pulled the spear from his friend's lifeless body and tried to plunge it into his own neck. But his bodyguard stopped him and dragged him to his bedroom. Their job title was staggeringly literal that day. Not much is known about the early life of Gaius Maecenas, a key political advisor and close friend of Augustus, the first Roman emperor. He first appears in the historical record in 39 BCE, when he helped arrange a marriage for the future emperor, who was at the time named Octavian. Maecenas would serve in several important positions during Octavian's career. For example, when Octavian left Rome to fight Mark Antony, he put Maecenas in charge of the city. After decades of close collaboration, some reports record that Maecenas fell out of favor with Augustus. It began when Maecenas' brother-in-law was implicated in a plot to take out Augustus. According to the chronicler Suetonius, Maecenas tipped off his wife that her brother was in danger, giving his brother-in-law a chance to escape punishment. You'd think Maecenas would be deader than a fried chicken, but amazingly, Augustus forgave his friend. It was a surprising move for a Roman emperor who, as a rule, weren't generally known for their forgiving nature. Nonetheless, Maecenas' influence was never the same. But we imagine he was pretty stoked on the outcome, as it did not end with him being escorted to a shallow grave. Titus Labienus was probably an extremely difficult name to go through middle school with. Nonetheless, the Roman nobleman was an important figure in Julius Caesar's political career, and a close ally who supported him multiple times during his rise to power. In 63 BCE, when Caesar was Pontifex Maximus and Labienus was tribune of the plebes, they often worked together as allies of Pompey. And when Caesar began his conquest of Gaul in 58, Labienus was one of his most trusted lieutenants. As much as they might have helped each other, it's most likely that Caesar viewed Labienus as his subordinate. Historians have cited this as the reason Labienus defected from Caesar's army in 49, when the general crossed the Rubicon and invaded Rome. After leaving Caesar's army, Labienus joined forces with Caesar's enemy, Pompey, who appointed him commander of his cavalry. Labienus perished at the Battle of Munda in 45 BCE, which was fought between Caesar and Pompey's son. There's just never a night of March around when you need one. In 49 CE, Roman Emperor Claudius's new wife, Agrippina, brought the Stoic philosopher Seneca the Younger out of exile to tutor her teenage son, Nero, who you may remember as the emperor who allegedly fiddled while Rome burned. Seneca quickly became not just a teacher to the heir to the throne, but a mentor as well. Early in their relationship, Seneca helped Nero with public speaking when he coached him through Claudius's eulogy. And when Nero became emperor, Seneca was an important advisor. But Nero became increasingly resistant to being told what to do. When Nero decided to have his mother taken out in 59 CE, Seneca reluctantly participated in the cover-up. Afterwards, the philosopher eventually withdrew from public life and focused on his writing. In 65 CE, when there was an attempt on Nero's life, the emperor used it as justification to accuse Seneca of treason. So he ordered his former tutor to off himself. Seneca, most likely wishing he had stayed retired, obliged and took his own life. In 1516 CE, Thomas More was one of England's brightest intellectuals. The Under-Sheriff of Britain wrote a satirical work titled Utopia that described an ideal government ruled by reason. It was translated throughout Europe, and King Henry VIII brought More into his inner circle. It's always nice to meet a fan. More was a devout Catholic and was reluctant to enter the king's service. Still, he became a devoted courtier, serving in several top roles in Henry's cabinet. But in 1527, when Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon had failed to produce a child, his friendship with More took a turn. More refused to support the king's plan to separate England from the Catholic Church in order to divorce Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn. If you know anything about Henry VIII, you know that the man could not suffer 1 ounce of betrayal, whether or not he'd totally invented it in his own mind. The king had More tried and executed for treason in 1535, which was so Henry. On the morning when his sentence was to be carried out, More reportedly thanked the king for putting him out of his misery. He thanked Henry for confining him somewhere he had convenient place and opportunity to prepare for the end, saying, "I am most of all bound to him, that his majesty is pleased to rid me out of the miseries of this wretched world." Do we detect a hint of sarcasm there? Shortly after thanking his former friend, Thomas More became Thomas Less, ahead. American founding fathers Thomas Jefferson and John Adams first met in 1775, when both were delegates to the Second Continental Congress. Despite their differing personalities, they became close friends. Their friendship deepened in the 1780s, when both were stationed in Europe on diplomatic missions for the young country. And if the musical Hamilton is to be believed, they both had mad rap skills. But when both returned to the United States to help draft the Constitution, their opposing political views strained their friendship. Jefferson preferred a decentralized government, while Adams wanted a strong federal government. The strain worsened when Adams defeated Jefferson in the 1796 presidential election. Under the system in place at the time, being the runner-up made Jefferson vice president. But it also made him a bit of a sore loser, and he acted to undermine the Adams administration from within. You can see why they got rid of that system before too long. The 1800 election was one of the nastiest campaigns in U.S. history. Jefferson's followers accused Adams of having a hideous hermaphroditical character. Meanwhile, Jefferson orchestrated a smear campaign against Adams. After Jefferson won, Adams, also a bit of a sore loser, didn't even attend the inauguration. The former friends remained distant until 1809, when their mutual acquaintance and fellow signer of the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Rush, encouraged them to reconcile. Jefferson wrote to John Adams a few years later on the occasion of Rush's passing. What followed was one of the most remarkable correspondences in American history. Incredibly, both men passed away on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Fidel Castro and Che Guevara met in Mexico in 1954 and immediately hit it off. The Cuban and Argentinian revolutionaries shared similar politics and goals and quickly became close friends and allies. Guevara was skilled in guerrilla warfare, which helped Castro in his campaign against the government of Fulgencio Batista, as documented in the 1987 video game Guerrilla War. That is no joke. When Castro's forces won and Fidel became the leader of Cuba in 1959, Castro put his friend in charge of both the National Bank and the country's biggest prison, and they all lived happily ever after. That is, until Guevara left Cuba in 1965 to attempt to spread his political ideas to more countries. In 1967, the Bolivian army and the CIA hunted down Guevara among a group of revolutionaries. Castro reportedly stopped communicating with Guevara months earlier and refused to intervene to save his friend. No one knows exactly how the U.S. found Guevara, but we can guess. While he was being held in captivity in Bolivia prior to his execution, Guevara repeatedly said, "Fidel betrayed me." Not exactly the kind of message that demands reading between the lines. John Lennon and Paul McCartney, you know, the guy from the fifth Pirates movie, met at a church party in Liverpool's Woolton Village in 1957 and quickly hit it off. Both of them lost their mothers at a young age. McCartney's mother Mary had passed from breast cancer the year before, when McCartney was 14, and Lennon's mother Julia would perish in a car accident in 1958. Their songwriting partnership was at the core of the Beatles' stunning success, though the dynamic changed in later years as the duo increasingly worked out their own songs separately, and bandmate George Harrison came into his own as a songwriter. In the early days, many of the Beatles' top hits were the result of close collaboration between John and Paul. "We wrote a lot of stuff together, one-on-one, eyeball to eyeball," Lennon later recalled. "That seems difficult. How do you write anything down when you're that close together?" But while Yoko Ono is often blamed for breaking up the Beatles in 1970, there were actually several reasons why the band split up, including contract disputes, creative disagreements, and issues of drug use. The relationship between Lennon and McCartney also continued to deteriorate over time. In 1971, Lennon wrote McCartney a letter essentially accusing him of delusions of grandeur over the Beatles' legacy. The feud crossed over into their music. McCartney's solo song, "Too Many People," included the lyrics, "That was your first mistake, you took your lucky break and broke it in two," widely interpreted as a swipe at Lennon. In return, Lennon wrote this scathing, "How Do You Sleep," which included the lyrics, "You live with straights who tell you you was king, jump when your mama tell you anything, the only thing you done was yesterday, and since you're gone, you're just another day." Ouch. The duo finally patched things up in 1974, when McCartney stopped by a recording session Lennon was having. The two had an impromptu jam session and resumed their friendship. In 1976, while McCartney was visiting New York, they even briefly considered walking over to the Saturday Night Live studios to answer Lorne Michaels' request for a Beatles reunion. Alas, it didn't happen, and a few years later, Lennon was gone. But what if they had walked over to SNL that night? Can you imagine? So what do you think? Have you ever had a falling out as bad as these guys? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.